What's the fastest way to stop anxiety? This. And last year alone, doctors prescribed millions of these bad boys because they work, they're fast, and they're insanely profitable.
The pharmaceutical industry made a killing.
Big Pharma, they're rolling in money.
Instead of drug dealers, they dress up in ties and suits.
But we have no idea what this is doing to us long term. And yet, millions of people, maybe even you or someone you love, are taking it. And the companies that make these pills, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're in the business of selling you happiness. In 2020, 1 in 6 adults in the US, over 40 million people, were on mental health medication. That's a lot more than the number of people who got therapy. You feel bad? No problem. Here's a pill. It's fast, it's simple, no questions asked. Getting a prescription has never been easier. A 10-minute doctor's visit, or maybe not even that. A few clicks online and boom, you're medicated. But just 50 years ago, it wasn't like that. Prescriptions for psychiatric medications have skyrocketed over the last few decades, and turns out there's a reason for that. So what happened? How did we go from treating emotions as a messy part of life to medicating them at record levels? And what if we got it wrong? This is a story about how we've handed our emotions to chemicals and the corporations that sell them. It's a story that involves drilling holes in people's heads, chatting with Aristotle, a sinister marketing ploy, and molecules deciding how and what we feel. But here's what I really want to know. Should it be that easy? Should we really be able to switch off our emotions like flipping a light switch? And most importantly, who actually benefits when we do?
Americans have been led to believe that there's a pill to cure just about everything.
Now, are people taking too many prescription drugs?
Thousands of people take psychiatric medication, but a large percentage of those people may not even understand why.
But you just take them without thinking. They just become part of your day.
Add another drug and another drug and another drug.
There are certain companies that are guilty. There are the pharmaceutical companies that encourage the overprescription.
We're not that healthy. We're not doing that well.
Corporations make gazillions of dollars in profit.
It's 1 a.m. on a tiny island of Portugal. I'm lying in bed, my heart is pounding, my chest is tight, and I'm thinking, this is it. I'm having a heart attack. This is how I go. And it all started with a toxic coworker, a person who somehow found a way to make my life miserable even from thousands of miles away, through Zoom. So there I am, shaking uncontrollably, waking up my partner for a terrifying drive to the hospital. When we get there, the doctor takes one single look at me and says,
"You're having a panic attack."
Then he hands me a small white pill, Valium. And within minutes, everything just stopped. The racing thoughts, the panic, gone. Just like that. One single pill. And in that moment, I understood something. I get it. I get why this stuff is everywhere, why people keep going back for it, and why it's so easy to accept. This isn't just my story. This is our story.
The first time I took it, I said, oh, I understand why people get addicted to this.
An entire society learning to deal with emotions, and somewhere along the way, starting to look for solutions in little pill bottles that just happen to feed $1 trillion industry. Remember the 40 million people on mental health medications in the US? That's like every single person in these states combined being on either antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety meds, or mood stabilizers. But what's even more staggering is how quickly this has happened. In the early 90s, that number was less than half. And it's not just America. In Japan, antidepressant prescriptions have more than doubled in the last 4 years. In the UK, 1 in 8 adults takes antidepressants. And even in places like India, where traditional healing methods like Ayurveda have been around for centuries, the use of tranquilizers is climbing every single year. It's a global phenomenon, and it's not hard to see why. Anxiety, depression, stress is everywhere. Life moves too fast, we're bombarded with information, and we're lonelier than ever despite being more connected. We're busy, overstimulated, and frankly, exhausted. So is it really any surprise that we're reaching for something, anything that promises to turn that volume down in our heads? In 2021, the World Health Organization released this report, which they called the Comprehensive Mental Health Action Plan. In it, they state that there is no health without mental health and pledge to address decades of inattention to and underdevelopment of mental health services and systems. Their goals are bold, and they are a step in the right direction. And yet, even as these policies aim for change, Our habits tell a different story.
People may be taking them too often.
Make one phone call, they prescribe them, I pick them up.
We're not just medicating, we're medicating a lot. And when you look at the drugs you take, you start to see a strange pattern. One that begins with an idea, a shift in how we view emotions themselves. First stop, ancient Greece. I'm pacing around this beautiful temple, but my heart is racing and I'm totally freaking out. And who shows up? Aristotle himself. But instead of handing me a pill, he tells me to sit down and take a breath. He says, your anxiety is information. And suddenly, I'm not some out of control broken person. I'm a human trying to make sense of my feelings. He might suggest I take a walk through the gardens, engage in a deep philosophical debate, or sit with myself to recalibrate. Back then, emotions were seen as something to understand, not necessarily fix. The Greeks. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and my anxiety looks a lot different. Now it is a spiritual crisis. A monk tells me I'm wrestling with demons. The answer is prayer, confession, and maybe a touching a holy relic for good measure. He warns me that my troubles could consume me if I don't reconnect with God and my community. Okay, but underneath all of the religious talk, there's a hint of wisdom. Anxiety was seen as something to work through with others, never alone. By the Renaissance, the pendulum swings again, and now my anxiety is seen less as a spiritual test and more as a mechanical malfunction. Now it's my nerves that are out of whack. The solution? Well, it gets a little sketchy. There's bloodletting, opium, or trepanation. Yep, they drill a hole in my skull. It's crude, but it's the first real attempt at treating anxiety with biology in mind. And then, boom, we hit the 1950s and everything changes. It's now 1957. The space race begins, Elvis is climbing the charts, and somewhere in a sterile fluorescent-lit lab, a group of researchers is about to change the way humanity thinks about emotions forever. Because what if, and this is the big question, what if all of our emotional struggles weren't moral failures or spiritual tests? What if they were just chemistry? Researchers soon figured out that chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA were more than just random molecules. They were messengers that allowed our brain to communicate and regulate itself, and yes, make us feel a certain way. Here's what they found, and I love this analogy. Your brain is basically running the world's most complex group chat, using chemicals called neurotransmitters as text messages. When you're anxious, it's like your brain group chat is blowing up with spam. But they discovered this one chemical, GABA, that's like the chat moderator. When you don't have enough of GABA, it's a total unrestrained chaos up there. This was huge because suddenly emotions weren't just mysterious forces we had to philosophize about or pray away. They were a chemical puzzle we could solve with drugs. But breakthroughs often come with blind spots. And as we'll see, this discovery opened doors to revolutionary treatment, but ignored a much bigger, messier picture. As soon as scientists started to understand the chemical basis of emotions, the race was on to develop drugs that could address these imbalances. But oddly, the drugs that started to come out of this revolutionary research were not always the result of a carefully planned psychiatric study. Check this out. In the 1950s, doctors were testing this medicine for tuberculosis, which was a massive health crisis at the time. But they noticed something strange. Their patients who'd been anxious or depressed were suddenly chilling out, getting social, feeling better. This accidental discovery led to the development of iproniazid. I said it right. Around the same time, scientists were experimenting with compounds to treat anxiety. This led to the development of Miltown in 1955, the first widely prescribed tranquilizer. And people went nuts for it. By 1957, Miltown wasn't just popular, it was the best-selling drug in America.
And was prescribed to stressed-out housewives with sleep disorders.
They called it Mother's Little Helper, and it became a cultural phenomenon, especially among housewives trying to handle, well, everything. More importantly, it became a proof of concept for a massive new market. But Miltown had problems. It made people sleepy, dependent, and kind of zombie-like. It's not ideal. But here's the thing, it opened the door. Scientists and companies now knew that they could create drugs that affected our emotions. And that led to something even bigger. A new class of drugs called
benzodiazepines.
And that's when things really took off. By the 1980s, the heavyweight champion in anti-anxiety meds, Xanax, has arrived. And let me tell you, this stuff was powerful. But that's exactly where things get complicated. Because Xanax isn't just effective, it's really effective. Maybe too effective. Think about it like this. Imagine you have a mute button for your anxiety. Sounds great, right? But what happens when you start hitting that mute button every time you feel uncomfortable? Let me break down what actually happens in your brain. Xanax works by basically turning up the volume on GABA. Remember our chat moderator from earlier? More GABA means less anxiety. Simple. Except your brain is way smarter than that. It starts thinking, hey, if I'm getting all of this GABA help, maybe I don't need to make as much myself. And that's where the trouble starts. Because now you need more Xanax to get the same effect. And if you try to stop, your brain freaks out because it's forgotten how to handle anxiety on its own. That's the insidious cycle of addiction. One pill becomes many and breaking free becomes increasingly difficult. And it's not just that. Here's what nobody tells you when they hand you that prescription. The chemical story, it's not the whole story, not even close. Let me give you an example. Say you're having panic attacks because your job is toxic. Your boss is a nightmare and you're underpaid and you're constantly afraid of getting fired. Now, you can take Xanax and yes, it will calm your racing heart, but guess what? That toxic job, still there. That financial stress, still there. That awful boss, yep, still there. This is what I call the chemical band-aid, a carefully crafted narrative sold to us by an industry that profits from our pain. We're buying into a massive marketing scheme that tells us complex emotional struggles can be erased with a simple prescription. While the actual causes of our anxiety, they're everywhere. Childhood trauma, social isolation, financial pressure, systemic inequality. You can't fix these things with a pill. But here's the problem. Solutions to these issues take time. They take work. And in our fast-paced world, that's not what most people, or more importantly, most companies want to hear. A simple solution doesn't generate quarterly profits. A simple pill does. And that brings us to the biggest player in this whole story. Alright, buckle up, because this is where it all takes a very dark turn. By the 90s, pharmaceutical companies realized that they had a gold mine on their hands. It's now 1997 and the FDA just made a quietly massive decision. They lifted the ban on direct-to-consumer drug advertising.
You can't just snap out of clinical depression. No one can, because it's a real illness.
You may feel anxious, can't even sleep.
We know what social anxiety can feel like.
Seems innocent enough, right? Wrong. This is a huge deal. Suddenly, pharmaceutical companies could advertise directly to you. Not just to doctors, to you. And boy, did they take advantage of it. They spent billions, and I mean billions with a B, telling us that feeling bad wasn't just feeling bad anymore. It was a medical condition that needed their meds.
There was an uptick in advertising. Ads saying, are you feeling more nervous? Our medicines can help you feel better.
This is something that blows my mind. Globally, pharma spent around $54 billion in 2022. Pharma advertising is clearly big business, and it's not going anywhere. But here's the really clever part. They aren't just selling meds, they are selling an idea. The idea that if you feel anxious, sad, or overwhelmed, something must be wrong with your brain chemistry. And conveniently, they have just the solution for it.
The pharmaceutical companies have done a great job of convincing people that ordinary states of sadness are problems of brain biochemistry that need to be treated with a drug. We're not supposed to be happy all the time.
Right.
Surely the medical world knows what it's doing, right? They've got years of rigorous studies, double-blind trials, and all that good stuff, right? Well, let me show you something that will make your blood boil. A huge study published in the British Medical Journal revealed that more than half of Big Pharma's own drug trials favored their own drugs. It gets even wilder than that. Turns out many of these independent researchers running these big trials were on Big Pharma's payroll. There's research grants and consulting gigs and speaking fees. One study found that 58% of psychiatrists writing depression treatment guidelines had financial ties to drug companies. But here's the most brilliant and terrifying part of the strategy. This massive advertising campaign has managed to rewire how all of us think about emotions. Feeling sad after a breakup, that's not just sadness, that's depression. Nervous about a big presentation, that's anxiety disorder. Every human emotion gets pathologized and labeled as an illness that needs fixing, with pills, of course.
I went to a therapist when I was 13. First day I went there, he said, every time you feel sad, you take one of these. It was Xanax.
Don't get me wrong, these medications help a lot of people. But we have to ask ourselves, are we complicit in a system that profits off of our suffering? And was the price that we pay for outsourcing feeling better? Maybe it's time that we rethink this whole system. And we kind of are. All right, I know this Big Pharma stuff gets intense fast. But beyond the polished ads and the shiny promises, there's a deeper, much more nuanced conversation happening.
We find the answers in our history. Usually it takes some inquiry, what I call a compassionate inquiry, of looking at ourselves with real curiosity. What is causing me to live the way I'm living, and why is it not working for me?
This is Dr. Gabor Mate, a physician and a renowned addiction expert who's been at this for over 45 years, working with people who are severely stressed, traumatized, and emotionally overwhelmed. He's been studying this topic long enough to know that emotions like anxiety or depression aren't just some chemical villains we've made them out to be. Remember the ancient Greeks? How Aristotle told me that my anxiety was information and not a problem to be solved? Well, Mate is on the same page. For him, anxiety and other emotions aren't things to be silenced, they're windows to our inner world. So when we feel anxious, it's not a sign of something being broken. It's our body's way of saying, hey, something needs attention here. But there's another side to this story. Not everyone agrees with Mate. You have mental health professionals saying, okay, but hold on. For some people, these medications are literally life-saving. Studies show that antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds can work for a huge number of people. And not just work, they can make life bearable again. People dealing with depression or severe anxiety who couldn't function, for them, medication is a lifeline. And honestly, who are we to take that away? But the real question isn't whether these drugs are good or bad. It's about when they're the right tool for the job. What if instead of silencing our emotions with pills, we started viewing them as the Greeks did, as valuable information? What if we used meds as just one part of the healing process, and not the first and only answer? That's the conversation that we should be having. But here's where things really start to get exciting. More and more, we're realizing that the answer isn't just popping a quick pill. In fact, over the last few years, there's been this amazing wave of interest in alternative therapies. And these aren't some wishy-washy, half-baked ideas. These are actual evidence-based methods of healing that are gaining serious momentum in the mental and emotional health world. Take talk therapy. It's a classic, but still one of the most powerful tools we have. You get to sit down with someone who knows how to guide you through the maze of your own mind, talking through issues, exploring your thoughts. Then there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically like teaching your brain a new way of thinking. It helps you identify those unhelpful patterns and behaviors that keep you stuck in the same loops. And then one of the newest tools on the block, somatic therapy, which explores the way our body holds on to emotions and uses movement to let go of that tension. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like it takes time. And yes, it does. It takes effort and commitment, and that's where our busy lifestyles don't match with these new approaches. It's way easier to pop a pill and call it a day. It's faster, but is it better? I wonder what would happen if we flipped the order, if we started with these alternatives first. What if you walked into a doctor's office, said, I'm struggling, and they handed you a resource for therapy, or talked about integrating somatic practices, or supported you in building out a whole emotional toolkit? Then, and only if needed, medications could play a role. Imagine how different that world might feel. The truth is, we need to make these alternatives more visible, more accessible, because right now they're seen as secondary when they should be front and center because they help us deal with what's underneath. And as a society, isn't that what we should be aiming for? To gain tools, not just treatments, to learn how to truly heal and feel without always needing a prescription for it? So where does this leave us? Well, we've created a world where our emotions have become commodities, things to be managed with pills, And sure, that has made a lot of money for pharmaceutical companies, but has it made us any healthier? Listen, for some, medication is absolutely necessary. But maybe for others, alternative therapies, mindfulness, or simply connecting with others can be just as effective, if not more so. The key is to recognize that one-size-fits-all solutions don't work here. It's not just about throwing pills at people and hoping they'll be okay. It's about creating an ecosystem where emotional health is approached with care, depth, and flexibility. What we need is better mental and emotional health education. People need to know that they have choices, that they're not limited to just one approach that's shoved down their throats by someone who profits from it. We need better access to therapy, holistic treatments, and other alternative therapies. Not everyone has the knowledge of the resources to pursue them, and that needs to change. But perhaps most importantly, we need to tackle the root causes of emotional pain. Trauma, poverty, inequality, these are all the things that often drive our emotional distress, and we have to address them head on. But we're not just fighting a lack of education. We're fighting a $1 trillion a year machine that profits when we see pills as the only answer. And that's a really tough battle to be in. Look, I'm not here to say medication is evil, but what I'm saying is that we need to see through the marketing. We have to start questioning a system that profits from convincing us our emotions are diseases that need lifelong prescriptions. We need to think critically about how we deal with mental and emotional health on a personal level. And that is something that you can do right now. Because maybe, just maybe, the real question isn't whether to take a pill or not, but how to take back control over our emotions from an industry that never had a right to them in the first place. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, this was the first episode of Emote, my new series that aims to make emotions less confusing. I want to cut through the noise to explore how our emotions actually work and whether we can build a smarter relationship with them. If you have any topic ideas or anything you'd like me to explore when it comes to your emotions, leave a comment with your suggestions. I really enjoyed going down the rabbit hole on this one, and I hope the topic raised some questions for you as it did for me. There's a lot of research and cross-referencing and different papers and studies and numbers that went into it, and I really did try to do the issue justice. You can find all of my sources in the doc that you can access in the description below. If you found this video valuable, feel free to share it with someone who might benefit from it too. I know it's not a light topic, but it's something I strongly believe we should talk about more. So yeah, thanks for being here. More to come. See you in the next one.